All right. Welcome, and thank you for joining our Congressional Defense and Foreign Policy Forum focusing on Western Sahara. We are so grateful to our incredible lineup of speakers and to all of you for joining us to hear about an amazing people, the Sahrawi, who are among the most persecuted in the world today for simply desiring the freedom of their homeland, which is the closest African nation to the United States of America, Western Sahara. With respect for your precious time, we have planned this forum for just 1 hour, and we will have a question and answer session segment at the very end for congressional staff to ask any questions they may have, and then we'll open it up to everyone else. But this congressional staff will have the priority. I want to, before we get started, thank Jason West, who is the person behind the scenes for his work setting up this platform. First up, to address the UN's failure regarding Western Sahara, we have two expert eyewitnesses to help us understand why we are here, why we are where we are today. Katlyn Thomas, who served as the highest ranking civilian official of the UN mission for Western Sahara, MINURSO, where she was responsible for the legal issues and oversaw the preparation of the list of voters eligible to participate in the referendum. As the chair of the UN committee of the New York City Bar Association, she oversaw the preparation of two reports addressing the legal issues over Western Sahara and has published two books, The Stealing of the Sahara, which chronicles the war, and an expose entitled The Emperor's Clothes, The Naked Truth About Western Sahara. Immediately after Katlyn speaks, we will have Ambassador Christopher Ross, who spent 50 years serving our country with the U.S. State Department and the UN Secretariat. He has lived or worked in every country on the southern and southeastern coast of the Mediterranean, with the exception of Tunisia. He served as ambassador to Algeria from 1988 to 1991 and to Syria from 1991 to 1998. The UN Secretary General named Ambassador Ross as the personal envoy for Western Sahara in 2009, a post for which he served until he stepped down in 2017. So I now turn this program over to Katlyn Thomas.
Hello, everyone. I have been asked to discuss the problems faced by the United Nations staff in conducting a referendum for the people of Western Sahara and why this mission failed in its objective. However, I suggest that the seeds of this failure were planted well before this mission was ever created, as far back as 1974. In 1974, Western Sahara was a colony of Spain, and Spain was ready in that year to conduct a referendum to allow the people of the territory, called Sahrawis, to choose their future. However, before that referendum could take place, Morocco and Mauritania imposed claims to the territory based on alleged ties between it and their rulers in pre-colonial times, and convinced the United Nations to ask Spain to postpone this referendum in order to allow the International Court of Justice to rule on their claims. In 1975, the ICJ issued an advisory opinion rejecting their claims. Despite this rejection, Morocco threatened that it would send a march of 350,000 civilians, called the Green March, to recapture the territory for the state unless Spain agreed to withdraw. Faced with this threat, Spain withdrew, and Morocco and Mauritania sent troops into the territory, causing a majority of the population to flee and establish a refugee camp in Tindouf, Algeria, where they and their descendants remain to this day, and igniting a 16-year war with a Sahrawi independence movement called the Polisario. You probably know all this. What you probably don't know is the role of the United States in fomenting this conflict. According to a report issued by the New York Times in 1981, when he was Secretary of State in the Ford administration, Henry Kissinger sent Deputy Director of the CIA, Vernon Walters, to orchestrate Spain's withdrawal and Moroccan takeover of Western Sahara. And Kissinger was not adverse to manipulating the UN to achieve his goals. According to documents obtained from a Freedom of Information request, on November 11, 1975, after Morocco halted the Green March, Kissinger suggested to President Ford that the United States should just turn the problem over to the UN, quote, with a guarantee it will go to Morocco, unquote. The following day he added, It has quieted down, but I'm afraid Hassan might be overthrown if he doesn't get a success. The hope is for a rigged UN vote. When the war broke out between Morocco and the Polisario, the United States, through both Republican and Democratic administrations, did everything it could to buttress Morocco's militarily to counter Polisario advances, all the while proclaiming its neutrality and support at the UN for the right of self-determination for the Sahrawis. As it was, by 1990, the war was essentially a stalemate that had all but drained the Moroccan treasury. And King Hassan, in order to obtain a ceasefire, was all too willing to agree to a plan proposed by UN Secretary General Perez de Cuellar to have the issue of sovereignty decided by a referendum. However, there were indications even then that Morocco would never allow a legitimate referendum to take place. Former Moroccan Minister of the Interior, Driss Basri, who was in charge of the Western Sahara dossier, reported in the Moroccan weekly El Ayam that he was in favor of the referendum, quote, only in a tactical way, unquote, and that the king had assured him that he would not have agreed to the referendum if he was not sure he would win it. Moreover, there were indications that the UN might not be an honest broker in the conflict. According to former UN Undersecretary Murat Golding in his autobiography, Peacemonger, he had suspicions at the time Morocco agreed to the referendum that Perez de Cuellar had, quote, an undeclared agenda with the Moroccans, unquote. So it was against this backdrop that the UN mission for Western Sahara, MINURSO, attempted in 1991 to conduct a referendum for the Sahrawis. The problems we faced started from the very beginning. Instead of having applicants apply directly to our offices, all applications were channeled through the parties, leaving us no way to tell whether potential voters were being left out. Although we were allowed free access to the inhabitants of the Polisario camps, we were prohibited any direct contact with the Sahrawis in Moroccan-occupied Western Sahara. We were not even permitted to broadcast why we were there or the choices the people had. The Moroccan media incorrectly declared that the referendum was only to confirm Morocco's sovereignty. I held regular meetings with commissioners and heard numerous stories of Sahrawi elders who were enlisted by the UN to help identify applicants being harassed, intimidated, or dismissed by Moroccan officials for denying eligibility for applicants put forth by Morocco. I also heard of attempts by the Moroccans to coach non-Sahrawis on how to appear to be Sahrawis, and other attempts to pad the voters list. On many occasions, there were delays and other problems. The majority of these problems were caused by Morocco. However, this fact was not accurately reflected in the reports issued by the Secretary General. Years later, I had the opportunity to ask the head of the UN peacekeeping unit at an official meeting why these reports did not tell the truth. I expected him to deny this, but instead he admitted it and said it was because the UN didn't want to antagonize Morocco. When Frank Ruddy, my American colleague in the mission, spoke out about these problems, he was abruptly fired. And when myself and others in the mission confirmed his allegations, the mission was temporarily halted, not to resume again until former Secretary of State James Baker III was appointed Special Envoy of the Secretary General to Western Sahara in 1996. It was only because of the integrity of the commissioners, several of whom lost their jobs at the UN because of it, that MINURSO was able to produce in 1999 a legitimate voters list. However, in doing so, we rejected over 100,000 of the applicants proposed by Morocco, and everyone knew that the people on that list would probably vote for independence. When Morocco saw that it could not get these 100,000 people back onto the voters' rolls through the appeals process, it simply pulled out of the process altogether. Morocco used the feeble excuse that there were disagreements over eligibility criteria. That was false. We scrupulously followed the eligibility criteria that had been agreed by the parties and suggested by Morocco itself. Instead of insisting that Morocco abide by its commitment, the UN, with the blessings of the United States, abandoned its commitment to the Sahrawis and simply asked the parties to negotiate some sort of political solution. Baker came up with several possible political solutions, the last being the, quote, peace plan, unquote, under which, after a period of autonomy within Morocco, the people eligible to vote would be able to choose between independence and Moroccan sovereignty. On July 31st, 2003, the Security Council voted unanimously to support strongly what it described as, quote, an optimum political solution on the basis of agreement between the two parties, unquote. The Polisario indicated a qualified acceptance of the plan. However, Morocco rejected it, insisting that autonomy under Moroccan sovereignty was the only option it would consider. Once again, the UN failed to take a firm stand with Morocco. The United States failed to back Baker and insist that Morocco accept the plan, and as a result, Baker resigned. In my view, the inability of MINURSO to fulfill its mission is attributable in large part to the lack of true commitment to self-determination for the Sahrawis on the part of the United States, and its unwillingness to take a firm stand with Morocco's intransigence, which then translated directly into a bias on the part of the United Nations. And I do not see any possibility for an equitable resolution of this conflict unless the policy of the United States changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Katlyn. And is Ambassador Ross ready to go?
I'm ready, Suzanne. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you great. Go ahead.
All right. Well, Katlyn has just given us the history up to about 2004. And now let's look at developments since then. In 2007, after James Baker resigned, the Security Council called for negotiations without preconditions between Morocco and the Polisario. And the purpose of these negotiations was to arrive at, quote, a mutually acceptable political solution which will provide for the self-determination of the people of Western Sahara. Those are the words used in successive Security Council resolutions. Now, in April of 2007, the two parties presented their proposals. Morocco for Western Saharan autonomy under its sovereignty, the Polisario for a referendum that included independence as an option and outlined the close relations that an independent state would have with Morocco. These proposals, as you can see, were mutually exclusive and left little room for compromise. From 2007 to 2019, my predecessor, my successor, and I, as personal envoy, sponsored 15 sessions between the two parties, with Algeria and Mauritania present as the neighboring states. Unfortunately, nothing that could be called negotiations took place during those meetings. And you will ask why? Well, it's fairly simple. The Polisario came to each session ready to discuss both proposals, but Morocco came with a major precondition that it would discuss only its own proposal. Needless to say, the Polisario refused to accept what it saw as a diktat, and the negotiations were stillborn from the very beginning. To break out of this stalemate, I tried to push discussions on various issues outside the two proposals. These included confidence-building measures, natural resources, and human rights. There again, the parties refused to engage constructively, each preferring to camp on its own proposal. I mentioned human rights. In the absence of progress on the future of the territory, human rights emerged as a substitute battleground, with each party accusing the other of serious violations. To deal with this problem, the Secretary General, in each of his reports to the Security Council, called for independent human rights monitoring, but to no avail. The Polisario stated its readiness to accept monitoring in the refugee camps in Algeria, but Morocco refused to permit it in that part of Western Sahara under its control, claiming that this would violate its self-proclaimed sovereignty. Now, during these 12 years of stalemate, the Security Council failed to bring any real pressure to bear. And this has been due in large part to divisions among its members. Some, especially France and its African allies, support autonomy. Others, including the UK and more recently Russia, argue for self-determination. Now, in December 2020, as you know, President Trump took the ill-considered step of recognizing Moroccan sovereignty over Western Sahara, a sovereignty that does not exist and was not his to bestow. Trump's action was ill-considered in three ways. First, it complicated any negotiating process by causing both Morocco and the Polisario to harden their positions. Second, it destroyed any prospect of regional integration and cooperation, including on counterterrorism and other security issues. And third, it damaged US relations with Algeria, its other important partner in North Africa, and the main advocate for self-determination. It's instructive in this regard that no other country, not even France, has followed Trump's example in recognizing a self-proclaimed sovereignty. Now, the Biden administration, for its part, has dealt with Trump's proclamation essentially as a dead letter. It's refrained, for instance, from referring to it in its public statements. So, as I say, the Biden administration dealt with the proclamation as a dead letter. It refrained, for instance, by referring to it in its public statements, and it has refrained from opening a projected consulate in Western Sahara. It has, however, stopped short of formally rescinding the proclamation for fear of undermining Morocco's rapprochement with Israel. So to sum up, we have two parties unwilling or unable to negotiate, the Security Council divided, and the US complicating things. But beyond avoiding substantive engagement and pressure, the Council has allowed the parties, particularly Morocco, to ignore its guidance with impunity. The Polisario and Algeria, for their part, have ignored the Council's call for a formal census of refugees, preferring to point to UNHCR's 2017 educated estimate of their numbers as 173,600. Meanwhile, Morocco has ignored the Council's call to avoid preconditions in the negotiations, to examine the call to examine the Polisario's proposal, and the call to allow MINURSO free access to all interlocutors in its area of operations instead of to one liaison officer. So what's next as we come to the end of 2021? The Secretary General has named a fourth personal envoy, the Italian diplomat Staffan de Mistura, who has had extensive UN experience in Afghanistan and Syria, and he has begun his consultations. If his mandate is to be limited to organizing meetings of the parties, as it was for his three predecessors, he will face the same difficulties that they faced. And already Morocco is insisting that Algeria come to the negotiating table as a full party, and Algeria and with it Morocco are refusing to proceed on that basis. I believe that the only way the new envoy can hope to break out of the stalemate is if the Council gives him a broader mandate, one similar to what James Baker worked with from 1997 to 2004. During those years, the search for a settlement was in the hands of the personal envoy, not the parties. Baker presented several variants of a settlement plan and engaged with the parties on their details. His efforts failed because each of the variants led to a referendum and because Morocco pulled back from its commitment to such a referendum after the death of King Hassan II in 1999. Now, in successive speeches over the years, King Mohammed VI has established very firm red lines. No negotiations except on the details of autonomy, no referendum that includes independence, and no monitoring of human rights. With these red lines, one's left wondering how the new envoy can possibly succeed. Now, given all of this, what should the US as the Security Council lead on Western Sahara do? These are my suggestions. First, it should ensure that Trump's proclamation remains a dead letter and make this quietly clear to the Polisario and Algeria. Second, it should support the new envoy fully as he tries to revive the existing negotiating process. Third, it should try to convince Morocco to negotiate without preconditions and to engage on the Polisario's proposal. Fourth, if the existing negotiating process remains stalemated, it should work with the other members of the Security Council to give the new envoy a broader mandate along the lines I've described. Fifth, it should try to convince Morocco to accept human rights monitoring, as the Polisario has done. And finally, but of great importance, it should mobilize much greater humanitarian assistance to the refugees living in wretched conditions in the camps. I'll stop there, and we can pick up specific items during the questions and answers.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ross. And now we're going to move to the next session, which deals specifically what is the current situation, life today for the Sahrawi people. We have two experts, Amit Dadon, Amnesty International's Mustafa Kassem Fellow for Middle East and North Africa, has been closely monitoring the situation in Moroccan-controlled Western Sahara. And then immediately after Mr. Dadon, Professor Vivian Solana, who's the assistant professor at Carleton University's Department of Sociology and Anthropology, as a socio-cultural anthropologist who works in Northwest Africa and Southern Europe. She lived in the refugee camps for a year and a half and has written numerous publications, including most recently An Invisible War in Western Sahara for the Middle East Report. So I now turn the program over to Amit Dadon.
Thank you for the introduction. It's nice to have all of you here paying attention to this issue. First, in discussing the human rights abuses in Western Sahara carried out by Moroccan security forces, I do want to start with one particular case that has been extremely disturbing, overall. And that's the case of Solana Kaya, a Sahrawi human rights defender and activist who is very pro-independence and supports self-determination. On November 15th, Moroccan security forces in plainclothes broke into Kaya's home and raped her and sexually abused her and her sisters and her 80-year-old mother. This isn't the first time Moroccan forces have done this or carried out torture against Solana Kaya and her family. They've been under house arrest since November 2020. In fact, that is the second time that same act has been perpetrated against her and her relatives. And there's also reports from local sources that this has been happening more than just these two times. That is just an example of the broader crackdown Moroccan authorities have carried out against Sahrawi activists to crush dissent in any means possible, with frequent documented cases of torture, arbitrary imprisonment, assaults, and falsified charges. Arbitrary deprivations of Sahrawi rights abound. Amnesty, in a July 2021 report, documented the targeting of at least 22 Sahrawi activists, journalists, human rights defenders, and minors, documented by Moroccan security forces since November 2020 alone, in an increasing crackdown. In Kaya's case, that is just, again, emblematic of what we've been seeing. There has been no meaningful investigations or accountability in her case, let alone in any of the cases that I'm about to mention. For example, sisters Mina Bali and Mbarka Alina, for waving the Sahrawi flag on their roof, were beaten and threatened after plainclothes police broke into and raided their home. Human rights defender Lachen Dali, who came to check on this family, was chased and attacked by police, taken away, further beaten, and abandoned miles into the desert. In February, authorities arrested activist Gali Bula, known to distribute Sahrawi flags, and tortured him in front of his mother and sister. He remains in prison with a sentence through the end of 2022 under bogus drug possession charges. A 15-year-old, Mustafa Razouk, arrested along with a dozen other minors in an arrest for Solana Kaya, in a protest for Solana Kaya, was violently arrested by police and tortured severely over his 3-day detainment, including by authorities pouring hot melted plastic on his body, beating him with iron sticks, and suspending him from the ceiling by a rope around his hands. Again, this is to a 15-year-old peaceful protester. 19 other Sahrawi activists continue to remain detained following grossly unfair mass trials in past years that included torture and coerced confessions and disproportionate sentences. Some of those detainees have carried out hunger strikes and One of them, for example, Barim Ismaili, was suddenly transferred to a separate facility, to a psychiatric ward with no justification, right after starting a second hunger strike. And this torture, inhumane treatment, denial of urgently needed care, all in violation of international law, has been carried out against several prisoners, some of which who've been held in 23-hour-a-day solitary confinement for over 4 years. One of them, Mohammed Hadi, has not been able to contact his family since April, when he had to relay threats from authorities that he would be put in a dungeon-like cell if his family did not stop publicly advocating for his release. So far in 2021, the Biden administration, despite committing to center human rights in its foreign policy, has failed to hold accountable the increasing abuses and crackdowns against Sahrawis that the recognition by Trump's administration in December 2020 has emboldened the Moroccan government to carry out. MINURSO, which, as has been described greatly just before me, its mandate was extended for another year just weeks ago in October. But unlike virtually every other UN peacekeeping mission, and despite calls from Amnesty and a bipartisan group of US senators, it still lacks critical human rights monitoring and reporting. The US is the penholder on MINURSO's mandate, meaning it has a responsibility to uphold human rights in such a measure. The Biden administration failed to do so. This lack of monitoring has long enabled security forces to carry out abuses against Sahrawis with impunity and provides a green light to continue cracking down. This administration further maintains strong ties with an expansive US backing of Morocco's security forces. The US provides 90% of all of Morocco's arms, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Abuses against Sahrawis have remained overlooked by this administration, and while it has continued to express and act on its strong support for the US security relationship with Morocco, it has remained definitely silent on the human rights abuses against Sahrawis. Amnesty continues to call on the Biden administration to uphold human rights in Western Sahara by reaffirming and standing up for the right to freedom of expression by Sahrawis, whether or not that relates to independence and self-determination, using US diplomatic influence to pressure Moroccan authority to end arbitrary arrest, torture of dissidents, and all other abuses systemically carried out against Sahrawis, to establish international and independent human rights monitoring to protect those suffering from abuses in the territory, and to review via the State Department the potential use of US-provided arms by authorities and training to carry out these human rights violations in Morocco and Western Sahara, and suspending those transfers if there's clear substantial risk they'd be used in further violations. Looking forward to hearing any questions that you all may have, and happy to answer them, and I will pass it along. Professor Solana.
Thank you, Suzanne, for this invitation, and for everyone else that's attending. I'm going to share some slides, so bear with me while I open those. So I've been invited, well, I'm going to begin to not waste time, but I've been invited to speak here today because I'm a professor of anthropology in the University of Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada, but I've had the privilege of receiving the hospitality of many Sahrawi families in the refugee camps found in southern Algeria, nearby the city of the Algerian city of Tindouf, while I was under, oh no, why is it the last slide? I'm sorry, I'll continue. Don't look at the images just yet. Hold on, oh, okay. All right, okay. This should be good. I've been privileged to receive hospitality. I've lived in these refugee camps for a total of 15 months, undertaking ethnographic research on the social reproduction of the Polisarios movement. So the image we are seeing is right now is of the refugee camps, how they look like. Just to know that these are there's some people that would claim or that in these camps are places where refugees are held hostage, that are places where that refugees are bred as terrorists, and from my very close experience, nothing could be furthest from the truth. So I've curated a number of images that I took while I was living in these camps to give you a very brief sense of how actually these refugee camps are organized and how everyday life looks there. It's important to know that the first people to populate these refugee camps were forcefully displaced from the Western Sahara back in 1975, and there was during the period of 16 years between 1975 and 1991, there was the first armed struggle against the Morocco's reoccupation of the territory of Western Sahara. And so I have a few images that are not mine. I was not alive yet, but this one that you're looking at is an image that I took of an image that is displayed in the refugee camps in the Sahrawi War Museum, an early image of the camps in particular. I would imagine this is the 27th of February, which is an all-women school where women were trained as soldiers to basically hold the fort and in the rear guard of in case Algeria would be invaded by Morocco, even though that never happened. Prepared, because really during this period, most men lived most of the time in and around Western Sahara defending the territory, and it was mostly women who stayed, who were in the camps and who organized became the social backbone and the physical backbone of a social revolution that, and this is an image of women organizing in committees. There was all kinds of committees from health, education, justice, artisan committees that really organized life so that, and also basically created the social and the physical infrastructures of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic in these refugee camps, which is an exiled state that was proclaimed in 1976 by the Polisario, and then, as I'm explaining, was organized and remains organized in these refugee camps. And it's a state that essentially prefigures, as Jacob Mundy puts it, Professor Jacob Mundy, or rehearses, if you like, the state that Sahrawis would like that aspire to see govern a free Western Sahara, or many Sahrawis, I should say. And definitely most, if not all, of Sahrawis in the refugee camps. The following images are all taken by me, which is why there are no more captions. This image is of the 40th anniversary of the Polisario Front in 2013. So I should also say that my fieldwork was between 2011 and 2013, even though I've done earlier visits and later visits, but this was while I was doing my research. There was on May 10th, a celebration of the 40th anniversary of the Polisario, and we're looking at kind of a marquee of people that were hosted, that a collection of politicians, journalists, expatriated humanitarian and development aid workers, Sahrawi officials, who were all sitting, watching the parade, but also gives you a sense, and it's important to be reminded that most of the nation states in Africa and many in Latin America officially recognize the Sahrawi Republic as a sovereign nation state and have maintained ordinary diplomatic relations, and many of their representatives came and attended this event. So just a very few images of that event as an introduction. Here we see it began with an ordinary military parade of what was in that moment the demobilized Sahrawi army. You can see in the back how many refugees came out to watch the event outside of the marquee. So these are ordinary refugees that were also coming to celebrate this event, which also counted with and paid tribute to the very remarkable and participation of women in the construction of this political project and the state in exile. And you also had celebrations of Sahrawi culture. Here you see a kind of a folkloric exhibit of Sahrawi dance and customary where children were walking along. In this case, they're holding a placard of the face of the charismatic leader of the Polisario Front and a martyr who fell martyr in the early years of war, and placards for every year that the Sahrawis have been waiting for the state for the opportunity to vote in free elections of self-determination, for the self-determination of the territory. This is an image of the Sahrawi Ministry of Transport, which you see, and this one is of the Ministry of Health for a Spanish audience. This truck in the background would be recognizable because it's been donated. It's actually of the reused. It's been donated through humanitarian aid. It's a reused Archancha police car. So the Archancha are the local Basque police forces, Spanish Basque police forces, and which has, I imagine, been donated to the Sahrawi Republic or to the refugee camps, and here being reused as an ambulance in this context, which is very much gives you a sense of how these ministries actually work through humanitarian, through and thanks to humanitarian aid. This is the Ministry of the Environment, Water and the Environment, with UNHCR trucks decorated with the Sahrawi flags. But of course, in these camps, there's also, that's an official commemoration, but there's also a day-to-day ordinary life. This is an image of what I would consider a quite typical homestead with a courtyard with a couple of mud brick houses around it, and typically a tent donated through humanitarian relief tent that from the outside might seem like quite a cold space, but looking at it from the inside, they're typically incredibly comfortable, hospitable spaces of conviviality, women playing traditional games in the evening. This is a garden, an attempt to grow food by one of my the neighbors of one of the families that hosted me during my research. Children playing. This actually, I have a video of these group of girls that had just come out of school, and they were actually rehearsing, singing the Sahrawi national anthem that I suspect they had been learning at school. Boys playing. This is an image of the head mistress of the director of one of the primary schools, in this case of the region of, or the camp or wilaya province of Bujdur. A kindergarten in the same province. An image of us waiting. This is an image of the preliminaries of a wedding, waiting for the family in the bride's compound, waiting for the family of the groom to arrive, and so we're kind of waiting to welcome them. An image of another family, a family that hosted me as well for a period of time, that breaking fast in Ramadan. So this is actually a meal that is considered a feast. It's an ordinary meal, like I said, in Ramadan of 2013. An image that's a typical image of everyday life in the camps, of groups of women organizing the food rations donated through humanitarian aid, and distributing, allocating them to different families. These refugee camps is, as I said, it's also a state in exile that is highly organized. It has different provinces. Each province has a regional government that is then, and each province will also have several neighborhoods. Each neighborhood will also have its local administration. And so at the level of the neighborhood is how food rations are distributed by committees of women that run this work. on an ordinary basis to ensure that everyone gets their fair share. Since the end of the first armed struggle between 1975 and 1991, these camps were, and during this period that has just been described by earlier speakers, of waiting for a promised referendum that well, as Katlyn Thomas has argued, was planted to fail from the beginning. The camps were reinserted into long-standing trans-Saharan commercial networks. Of course, the Sahrawis are connoisseurs of the desert. And so throughout these refugee camps, you will find considerable markets that are belong to these trans-Saharan commercial networks. You also have a growing number of migrants, of circular migration, both throughout Africa, but also increasingly all over Europe and significantly in Spain, given the post-colonial ties between both nations. And so you have also a significant contribution to the economy overall also comes from migrant remittances and the commerce of men in particular, whilst women in particular are the ones that run all the local administration. This is an image of a small restaurant, as an example of small commerces that exist today in the camps. It's important to note that the Sahrawi Republic has its own media. This is an image of their TV station. They also have a radio. They have online and they have a newspaper, both physical and online, several magazines. This is the TV from the inside. This is an image of an all-women's professional training school called the Olof Palme School. It's in the Wilaya of Layun, where young women receive all kinds of training, including things like information technology and training with other crafts. This is an English school that is there's several throughout the Sahrawi Republic in the camps. An image of the film school that exists in the camps, and an art school that exists in the camps. There's also a music school. This is an image of the National Museum, and an image of, also to give you a sense, this is a picture I took of during the summer of 2013. Where this is the middle of the summer, there are no foreigners around, but there are countless activities that are run by the Polisario and by all these, by its many institutions to keep refugees active, and this was in particular a dance competition that was held in the Wilaya of Bujdur. And so this is the audience, but this is one of the the groups that came to compete, as an example of the many cultural activities and that happen there on an ordinary basis. This is an image of the Women's Union's Congress, where in 2015, actually, so this was after my fieldwork, but when I came to visit on another occasion, it was the I believe, yeah. So there was different candidates that were campaigning to be elected as the Secretary General of this institution, giving speeches, and people that had shown up, and indeed there are, like I was saying, countless conferences, but also many. There's also an everyday political life that includes many different elections. I'm going to finish my presentation with some images of the elections to parliament that I was witness to in 2013. This is the Sahrawi parliament that operates in the camps, and this is the neighborhood where I was living, the entrance to the local administration of that neighborhood in particular, like I'm saying, every neighborhood will have one, and then every province will have one. And this was images that I took when I accompanied some of my hosts to go listen to people that were presenting themselves as they were campaigning for themselves, and folks that had shown up to hear and to learn of the different options that they had of people to choose from. And this is an image of the audience, and an image of the election days when they finally came to vote for parliament. And so with this last image, I would like to end the presentation, and hoping that we see a similar image, but that in relation to self-determination rather than local elections, and similar images like this in the Western Sahara. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we are going to have a few quick words on why Democrats and Republicans should care about this issue. I'm pleased to introduce my friend and colleague, Bill Fletcher. He and I are living proof that in these toxic political times, people who care about truth, care about justice, and care about upholding American values can be great comrades. Bill's a longtime trade unionist, writer, and past president of TransAfrica Forum. He's going to provide a perspective from the left on why Democrats should care, and then I will close with the perspective from the right and why Republicans should care as the president of Defense Forum Foundation. Bill, the floor is yours.
Suzanne, thank you. Thank you very much. And in the interest of time, because we are over time, I'm going to keep my remarks very brief. And these remarks are directed at Republicans and Democrats. The 1991 through 2020 truce between the Polisario and the Moroccans allowed the world to go to sleep on the question of self-determination for the Sahrawis. That there was a loss of interest by most of the world in this horrendous situation, as documented and discussed earlier in this presentation. The world cannot afford that, not just for moralistic reasons. If you look at the situation in Northwest Africa, as I've been saying repeatedly, along with Suzanne, the danger of regional war is very real. We're not just, and this is not just rhetoric, the breakdown of the ceasefire brought on by the Moroccan provocation and violation of agreements beginning in November puts the entire region in a very, very unstable moment. We're looking at not only the contradiction between the Sahrawis and the Moroccan monarchy, we're also looking at increased tensions between Morocco and Algeria is very well armed. The Moroccans have been engaging in provocations against the Algerians, including promoting the idea of a secessionist group within Algeria. You have the potential of bringing in other state actors like Mauritania, with whom the Polisario came to an agreement back in the 1970s, ending their conflict. Spain, the former colonial power. France, without whom the struggle probably would have ended a long time ago. But France's involvement in propping up the Moroccan monarchy. And finally, non-state players, the Al-Qaeda and the Maghreb, Daesh, and other forces that would love to take advantage of the situation as it gets worse. So we're talking about the potential of regional conflict. And that is something that could draw the United States in. It could become a major quagmire. For those reasons alone, leaving the moral issues aside, leaving the issue of human rights aside, those reasons alone, the United States needs to take a completely different approach towards the situation in the Western Sahara and actually become a force for justice as opposed to a force of obstruction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. I just want to state from the as a Republican that I've worked on human rights issues for most of my life, and I've never met a more honorable, noble people than the Sahrawi of Western Sahara. The reason what Republicans should care about this is we're supposed to stand for the rule of law, and we've been engaged in this so-called war on terrorism, but we're never going to win a war on terrorism until we uphold the rights and respect the Muslims who share our values. And I just want to quote from James Baker, a Republican who was very much involved in this issue, agreeing with the fact that the Sahrawis were a sophisticated society with a 95% literacy rate, despite the fact that they were living in refugee camps, and had a democratic form of government that offered women a very prominent role, something that was extraordinary in the Arab and Muslim world. When Baker was asked whether that was not a society that should be championed, he replied that from a strictly human rights standpoint and from the standpoint of the right of all people to self-determination, the answer to your question is yes. We have been engaged with Afghanistan and Iraq and trying to create a democratic society there. The Sahrawi have been that from their inception. In fact, they renounced Marxism and communism, and they were the only African liberation movement not to receive military or diplomatic support from the Soviet Union. A WikiLeaks document exposed that because the Sahrawis embrace Western ideals, including religious freedom and women's equality, they're intolerant of extremism. Their severe punishments for traffickers and anyone associated with terrorism had caused Islamic extremists to label them as too close to the West and not pious enough. For the Sahrawis, talking about women having equal rights, they live it, and we can see it, and they have demonstrated that. Regarding religious freedom, they send their children to Catholic homes in Spain as a reward in the summer. I was at a mega church in California that Dr. Frederick Price had founded when President Abdelaziz, the then president of the Sahrawi Republic, invited that church to come and plant churches in Western Sahara when they got their freedom. That because he wanted religious freedom to thrive there. Right now, we have Christians in the refugee camps practicing their faith. Finally, I want to end with a story about human life. We live in a time of jihadists and extremists who are denying girls the right to education and beheading Christians. And we see from Professor Solana's slides the important role women play and the emphasis on education opportunities for women. But I want to close with a story about their respect for human life. And Jason's going to show you, put on the screen a photo. I met a Sahrawi with no legs on one of my trips to the refugee camps, and he told me the story. He was a shepherd during the war and was taking his sheep to the well for water, but the Moroccans had placed landmines at the well, which is a war crime, and he stepped on a landmine and it took off both his legs. And the Polisario soldiers risked their own lives to go into this heavily controlled area, heavily controlled by the Moroccan military, to save this man, to pick up the broken bits of his body, a man who had little or no chance to survive. But these Polisario soldiers risked their own lives because that's how much they value human life. So in my closing opinion, Democrats and Republicans should not only be champions of the Sahrawi people, we should recognize their republic as the legitimate government of Western Sahara, as the African Union has done, and call for the immediate withdrawal of Morocco's illegal occupation. Now, with that, I know we only have a few minutes to open for questions. I want to defer to anybody with congressional staff because we only have a few minutes left. Anybody with the congressional staff, some people have to leave right at 11. And if there's questions that you wanted to ask that didn't get a chance to, feel free to email me. You all have my email. So, and there's an icon there for raising your hand. So Jason, if you want to, if you could, not sure.
Yeah, Suzanne, we do have a question from Mr. I'm sorry, I'm not sure. Atabangwang.
Yeah, is there anybody? He's with our group. So is there?
That's the only question so far. So if
okay.
people would raise your hands, there should be an icon to raise your hand if you'd like to ask a. We have a Teresa Smith Sharif.
Okay. I don't see any congressional staff. So why don't we go to Otto first, who's one of our friends from South Africa. And
okay.
then we'll go to Teresa.
I'm going to go ahead and allow you to turn your mic on now. So if you'd go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. You should be able to unmute yourself. Yep, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Susan, I must say Thank you so much for organizing, putting this together. Actually, the time of this meeting is very convenient for us also as well, because 10 a.m. in the US is then 5 p.m. in South Africa. I'm so happy whenever you have meetings at this time, just count me in. I will always be there. I just want to confirm what the previous speaker just said. The question of the Sahrawi remains a one that keeps dividing the continent of Africa. I'm not a prophet, but from what Vivian has illustrated, I can tell us that within the next 5 years, we're going to have an explosion in the continent of Africa, because Algeria, that has been a pillar of the Sahrawi struggle, has cut in as a ruptured diplomacy with the Moroccans, and the Moroccans has penetrated a lot of African countries with false promises and false hope. And these countries that they have penetrated with false promises are some sort of getting an awakening. They are coming to a realization that the Moroccans are not trustworthy people. And the Anglo-Saxon bloc in Africa still stands strong with the Sahrawi communities. So within a short space of time, we're going to have some French countries or Francophone countries in Africa that are coming closer towards the Sahrawi question. And if we are not careful, we are on our way to an inevitable explosion, because the Sahrawis they have waited for a long time. Even myself that support the Sahrawi cause alongside Susan, we're becoming impatient. The question I want to throw in the floor is that, guys, are we hoping that the Biden government is going to revoke the Trump's decision anytime soon? Thank you so much.
So, yeah, Katlyn, do you want to answer on that one? From a legal point.
Yeah, well, from a legal point, there is nothing to prevent the president and the administration from backtracking, reversing the decision to grant, to have the U.S. recognize Morocco's sovereignty over Western Sahara. We have done that in a number of different instances and in different parts of the world when we have changed, when there's been a regime change and we no longer support one regime, we want to support another regime. In fact, that happened with East Timor quite recently. So there's nothing preventing the United States from doing that if the administration wants to. And it is up to the president to do it. It's not something that Congress can do, although Congress can encourage the president to take certain policy decisions and has. Congress has been, in some ways, very supportive of having President Biden reverse this decision, and some of the actions it's taken in appropriations and other measures throughout the past year. And we're hoping, those of us who have been pressing forward on this issue are hoping that Congress continues to pressure the Biden administration to reverse this decision. Of course, many lawyers have taken the position that it should be reversed. The Association of the Bar of the City of New York has taken this position and wrote a letter to the administration requesting this. I'm hoping that in the future, the American Bar Association will do likewise. There have been clinics at law schools throughout the country that have taken this position and have urged Biden to reverse this decision of former President Trump. So there are a number of lawyers who recognize that from a international law standpoint, this decision cannot stand. And we're pressing to have this point reinforced with the Biden administration. But politics being what it is, we can't predict anything that's going to happen in the future. All I know is that we need continued support from civil society around the world to have this decision reversed and to support the Sahrawi cause in Europe, in Africa, and everywhere else. Thank you.
Thank you, Katlyn. I told everybody, I promised everybody that we would keep it to an hour. We ran a little bit over. I appreciate that. Staying with us. Thank you, everybody. I think that the speakers were outstanding, but of course I'm biased, but thank you so much. Katlyn, Ambassador Ross, Amit, Vivian, and of course my colleague Bill Fletcher and for all of you joining us. We are going to be making a transcript and a video of this, which will be available for future viewing. And I also want to just close out by thanking Jason West for handling the platform for us, and hope to engage with everyone more and more on this issue at this very critical time. And thank you so much for joining us, spending part of your International Human Rights Day with us on this important program about the Western Sahara. Thank you so much.